Our drastic change is potentially coming to the Miami Dolphins offensive playbook based on some comments we heard from Tua Tagovailoa. We'll go over that as well as evidence as why there may be some change. We'll also explore the Miami Dolphins' grim salary cap outlook for this offseason. We'll talk Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt. I'm going to ask Neal what he thinks about everyone's Justin Fields and Kyler Murray replacement ideas, and I can already imagine the headache he has just from hearing me say that. We'll talk Derrick Henry. Is he putting out feelers to become a Miami Dolphin? We're going to talk all about that as we dive fin too deep with myself and Neal Driscoll. Do us the favor, smash the like button, subscribe if you're new. Let's get into it.
Loses the football. Touchdown! Got it! You have got to be kidding me. Jalen Waddle has a Dolphin touchdown. And he will score! Deep upfield down the near side, down open. Touchdown! The run from Tua Tagovailoa. Touchdown! He's going deep. He's got it for a touchdown. He's in.
Beautiful day to be a Dolphin fan. Let's go!
You're listening to Fin Too Deep.
Tua back to throw. Blitz coming. They get to him. No, he takes off running. And he's in. Touchdown, Miami.
With the sixth pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Miami Dolphins select Jalen Waddle.
Giving you unfiltered, informed, and controversial takes on the Miami Dolphins and the NFL Draft. Here's Reason and Neal.
What is good, Fin Nation? What's good? It's your boy Reason. We're back here for another one. And I am joined by the Twitterless, the man who has left the toxic land known as X, Neal Driscoll. This is now the only place you're going to be able to find him on social media unless he's hitting you up on those burner accounts. What's going on, Neal? How you doing, brother?
No, man, it was time, man. I like, here's the thing. I actually had a lot of people email me, and I really do appreciate a lot of the support. It's crazy that my crazy words mean a lot to so many people. The likelihood is that sometime I will be back. I don't want to spend the off season in toxic land, man. I don't want another season of Tua McDaniel hate and talk. And, someone had a really good point in something they emailed me. Well, just block the people that bother you. And it's probably an easy solution. For me, it was one of those things, man. Like, you love this team, right? Reason we love this team. Like, for me, for 36 years, outside of my friends, my family, it's been one of the most important things in my life. We go, we lay an egg. We've had probably the biggest catastrophic drop down of where we were to where we ended that I've ever experienced as a fan of this team. And, I get people sending me message like, your boy Devon A-Chain is letting us down and Mostert's averaging 4 points. We just lost our 24 years without a playoff win, and people are kind of pining that Raheem Mostert's Gale Sayers. And like, it's just, to me, it's just like, I know after losses like that, it gets bad. I miss a lot of the conversation. I actually have to jump back on. I just told you why. I'm chasing down somebody who owes me something, but it's just always tough after a loss like that. I feel like I'm like a lot of people, man. My our hearts were ripped out of our freaking bodies. I don't think we could have ever envisioned when we were 9-3 fighting for that number one seed that we'd have a first round exit in the playoffs. And, frankly, more questions about the coach, more questions about the quarterback. At the end of the day, I think a lot of it is warranted. It's going to be a very interesting offseason because, there's going to be change. Who knows how big? It's not going to be Tua. It's not going to be McDaniel. But I will say this. I do think there's a big core of this roster that could be on the move. And with that, there's a lot of change. And it's going to be an interesting offseason. And you mentioned it from the jump. They got some salary cap gymnastics to do. and it was $40.3 million not too long ago, right? And then they go out and sign 8 future deals, and now they're pushing 49, 50 million in cap space that they're over the cap. And I know we're going to dig into it. I'm excited to talk about it, but it's going to be a very long, interesting off season.
Yeah, and hey, now we get into our the seasons. Our second favorite time of the season is coming up soon with the draft and everything like that.
Right, absolutely.
So who knows? We
we have a first round pick for once.
Yeah, and we could be pushing the Cedric Van Pran or Jackson Powers Johnson agendas this round, depending on what happens with Connor Williams. Let's be honest here, or maybe because it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. But anyways, just kind of speaking off what you said, and people don't realize, speaking as someone who has a platform and does this as much as I do it, fans think it's weird. I'm not one of those people where if we lose, there's people who are negative in this community where if we win, you don't hear from them all week. All of a sudden they don't do film breakdowns. All of a sudden they don't do all this stuff because we won and it didn't fit their agenda. Win or lose, I'm here. And what people don't realize is, man, sometimes you got to put on a smile when you're dying inside. Right. Like I'm telling you, it took me, I'd say I wasn't really starting to get over that loss until Wednesday-ish is when I started.
I'm not over it yet. I'm not.
I was starting to get over it Wednesday, because the fact of the matter is, me and my grieving process with anything is, I usually come to the conclusion, what's done is done. What can you do about it? Right. What is the point of crying over spilt milk? But it was a solid 3 or 4 days of me, like, even my wife being like, man, you seem so sad. You seem so down, blah, 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 blah. But bro, we got families and kids. I can't sit there and let a football game dictate, how I am around my kids and my wife and in my personal life. Right. There's got to be a certain point where, you kind of put your foot down. But, fans in the chats or on X, they think we just go about it. And when we add context to why things go wrong, all of a sudden we're making excuses. We're not. We're just as mad as you guys are. But we are up here trying to be informative and explain why things went the way they did. Now, some of you may not like to hear it because you just want to blame one singular person for the cause of all your problems. But, it doesn't work out that way. You know what I mean? So
100%. The smartest thing I ever did, Reason, was start a family, because the Dolphins' losses mean less to me than they used to. I'll be honest. But, for me, I'm not over it because the Houston Texans are playing a playoff game this week, and the Houston Texans aren't better than Miami Dolphins. And for me, where the line gets crossed, and
but if we were in their division, do you think we would have lost our division if we were in their division? Come on, bro. We would have won that division.
Dude, I'm going to say this right now. I got to stop writing these big checks for the Miami Dolphins that they can't cash. It's one of the things.
But the AFC South's weak.
I agree. But the thing that gets me, man, is just that, like, and I'm not perfect at all, right? Like, I get very emotional. I get very into it. This, you've talked me off the ledge a few times, but when you start harassing me and challenging me, and then I say, hey, fine, you want to throw down? Let's meet and throw down. I'm not afraid. Like, win, lose, or draw, I'm down. And then you go and make a big spectacle and try to, like, have cancel culture attack me. I mean, I hate cowards.
Well, people were inboxing to his family. I know you got off X, but people were messaging his mom. People were messaging, like, they were sending threats and stuff like that to his family members on social media, bro.
Well, yeah, I had a burner account that sent my wife a message on Facebook, and I will just say, whoever that burner account is, whatever you want to do, you tell me, and we'll figure it out, because that's where my line gets drawn, man. When you come into my family, I'll huff and puff and blow your damn house down. And that's just for me. And that's one of the things I got to work on, is letting this team's wins and losses bring me down to a point where I'm kind of, I'm falling to the scumbags. I'll call them scumbags. I don't care, man. I don't got anything to lose. And, I think it's just like, I think it sucks that like, this is why I think X is great, right? That's how I met you, Reason. That's how I've met a lot of great people that I engage with, and I enjoy their football perspective. I wish there was an X with a filter where you had to pass an IQ test and know something about football to get to there, so that I don't have to interact with kind of that, because there's so many good people. And, like, I'll be honest, man, I woke up, and I was very hungover, and I had I look at my Yahoo, and I have like fucking 43 emails, and they're people that I expected to get emails from and people I didn't, and in between. And it was like, wow, like, there's people that actually give a shit what I do and with my life that are part of this community. And we've worked hard to build a community here. So like, I got to figure it out, man. I need a break. I need a break away from it for a little bit just because the loss hurts. And then, I also don't want to get myself provoked to a point where, the next thing I know, I'm getting called in an office, losing my job, which someone has tried to do to me here undercover before in the past. So like, it is what it is. It's on to the next. I'm with you. It's time to move on. Like, right. Like I'm not happy about it, but there's so much talent on this team. The Miami Dolphins aren't going extinct. They're going to be back in the season. They're going to be back in the swing of things next season. They're going to probably be a playoff team again. And what we need to see is, can they make the necessary changes?
Can they take the next step? Can they
make the next step?
Can they? Because I was telling people, even when we were winning this season, right? I was telling people, there's levels to this shit. And there's levels to winning. And, you look at a guy like Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow hasn't even reached the epitome of winning yet, right? Like, nope. He's only won to a certain level. Like, there's levels to this, right? And we gotta jump some levels here. Like, our name was Mario, right? I want to get your thoughts on this because everyone's heard my thoughts. For those that haven't, I'll give you a refresher. Basically, where I fall with Tua's extension is I understand why it needs to happen. I think he's earned an extension. I don't think he's earned one that resets the market. I also think, deep down, if you're going to ask me, Reason, do you wish we had another year? Sure. But I don't view that fifth-year option as another year because of the salary cap implications and the flexibility it gives them if they extend them this year. I think it's in best party's interest to get an extension done. I just don't think you come close to resetting the market. Now, I had Lewis up here on Dolphins After Dark. He made a great point. He shouldn't make more guaranteed money than Lamar Jackson, who came in at 185, right? Now, I agree with that. What my problem I think you're going to have with is athletes first sitting at the table saying, Burrow makes 219. Herbert's a known league-wide choker. He makes 218. He makes $1 million less than Burrow. All right? Tua's what? Let's do the math here. Tua's one more in the NFL, whether it's back-to-back playoff season, whatever we want to do here. Other than his little Rookie of the Year award, what has Herbert done? Tua's been in the MVP conversation the past 2 years. Again, this is me. Take me out of it. This is what the agent is going to say at the table. I'm just the messenger here. And people can try and claim hollow stats all they want, but we've been waiting for someone to lead the lead in passing since Dan Marino. He's also the first starting quarterback at the Pro Bowl since 1995 for the Miami Dolphins. Let's not act like these have grown on trees, and let's not act like we don't have beggars being choosers all of a sudden because they were begging for this kind of production for the last 23 years. This is all that's going to be brought to the table and put right at the doorstep of Chris Grier. Now, the injuries, right? This is his first full season. I think that comes into factor. I think you can use the fact that, hey, in big games this year, we were 2-6. We only beat the Chargers and the Cowboys. Now, albeit of the 7 losses we took this year, Neal, 4 of those were only to 2 teams. Think about that one for a second.
Bills and Chiefs.
Right? Over half of our losses were only to 2 teams. Think about that for a second. But anyways, I digress. So I get where Grier's side is. Where do you sit on the extension? How do you see this playing out? Because Neal, I refuse. It's not about what I believe or what I want. Logic in my head refuses to. I refuse to believe Daniel Jones is going to get more money than this guy. I refuse.
I think this is the biggest question in the NFL in general heading to the offseason. What the Dolphins do with Tua Tagovailoa's contract. And why I think that is because I think the national narrative, and we've seen both sides of it. People say that, it's hard for Tua to thrive in the system. We've seen the Dolphins are a Super Bowl roster with a quarterback that's holding them down. The reality of it is that finding a franchise quarterback is hard. No matter what I think about the playoffs, Tua Tagovailoa is a top 10 quarterback in this league. He just is. The supply and demand of the quarterbacks in the NFL, there's not 10 quarterbacks better than Tua Tagovailoa. So that we can all agree we have a quarterback that's in the top third of the league. And that's huge. And, I will say for me personally, I was very disappointed with Tua from Baltimore to Buffalo to Kansas City, where he threw four touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He averaged 203 yards passing a game and a 66.2 QBR. In the playoffs, he had the lowest passing yards of any quarterback in the playoffs and the lowest QBR. That's Mason Rudolph. Despite all of that, there is no way in hell the Miami Dolphins are not going to get an extension done with Tua Tagovailoa. And there's 3 main reasons. First, Tua's agent's not going to let it not happen, and they'll play hardball. Second, the Dolphins get salary cap reprieve that they need to execute their offseason plan. And third, who the hell else are you going to get me? And I don't want to hear Kirk Cousins. And we told people.
Let's talk about this. I want to hear your thoughts on Kyler Murray and Justin Fields. Remember what we ask of quarterbacks to do in this offense. Those guys aren't good enough processors, and they don't read defenses fast enough for what we need to do and execute. What do you think of those people suggesting those names? I think it's ludicrous.
For me, first of all, if you want Justin Fields as your quarterback, then go trade Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. There's no point to have them on the outside with a player like Justin Fields. He's not going to utilize them, and then you're spending
at DJ Moore.
Then you're spending 30% of your salary cap on players that aren't getting maximized. So I like Justin Fields, a football player. If I'm Atlanta, I'm knocking down that door tomorrow, right? If I'm the Raiders, I'm probably knocking on Justin Fields' door tomorrow. For the Miami Dolphins, it doesn't make any sense. I will say this. I'm actually intrigued, and I've always been intrigued by Kyler Murray. I don't know why, but he's another guy that always lets me down when I get intrigued in him. I don't know how much he loves the game of football. He's already fat and happy in terms of his contract. I don't view him as an upgrade to Tua. I don't view him as more of a winner than Tua by any means. So I like Kyler Murray, the football player, but I don't view him as an upgrade as under Tua. Now, if for whatever reason they couldn't work out a deal with Tua and Tua's like, I'm out of here, I'd pick up the phone and call Arizona, and I wouldn't be,
I'd call Washington for Sam Howell, actually.
Sure.
A guy who can move and has the arm and stuff like that, and he's still young.
Well, Reason,
right?
That's a call they should make anyway, despite having Tua.
Agree.
Because I'll move off $3.5 million right now of Mike White to go bring in Sam Howell, right?
Well, remember, I wanted Baker Mayfield as our backup last offseason, right?
You talk about a quarterback that I love, and I don't think he's better than Tua by any means. I've always been a Baker Mayfield guy, man. I love what he did. I thought that was awesome and so redeeming.
Sam has that same swagger too. It feels like, right?
I always called Sam Howell Baker Mayfield light. That's kind of what he reminded me of a little bit. But I like Sam Howell. But no, I like. And then the Kirk Cousins, he's an unrestricted free agent coming off an Achilles. I will say this. Well, the Dolphins they weren't interested in replacing Tua with Kirk Cousins. But we talked about this on the show. I think it was last year that there was some rumblings that Kirk Cousins intrigued Miami. All that doesn't matter. Tua's going to be the quarterback. They're going to work out a deal. And look, and likely, I think they're going to overpay Tua a little bit, probably. I think he's going to get a little bit more than maybe we even all anticipate. With all that said, I think it's a move they have to make. I'm glad I'm not Chris Greer because, I'd have a hard time doing it, Reason. I'd want to keep him on the 5th year and try to franchise tag him if he excelled. But you and I both know
that franchise tag's too big with our salary cap.
Right. You can't do that because they know where you are in a salary cap, so you don't have much leverage as a team. Yeah. And look, and Tua's play has earned him an extension. I think it's the money that's going to get interesting. But look, it's okay to have questions about Tua. That doesn't make you not a Dolphins fan. We want to see that next step of his development.
You say the next step of the development, and I laugh not at you, but it just goes back to what it's a new narrative every year, right? Like, after year 1, you can't win because of him. After year 2, he'll never play at an MVP level or be a franchise QB. Year 3's in the MVP conversation. Now it's, he can't stay healthy. It stays healthy this year. Well, he can't win in the big game. It's something new every year with this guy. But notice he knocks down the narrative every year. So we know him and Nick are going to attack this offseason. I think he's, this was about staying healthy and playing the full year, Neal. I think you'll see Tua get back to that guy who's more frequently getting out of the pocket, the one we saw in Arizona. I think you'll see that guy come back more as he feels more comfortable with his body. He got through clean and he proved his point. And now I think you're going to see him working on throwing off platform and extending plays, this offseason with Nick. You're going to see that as a big time focus, I think.
That's my biggest thing about Tua is the ability to create plays that off script. I think that is where the area needs to be. Like I'll be honest, like he could have ran for a few more yards this year, but I don't. If that's not his game and he's a traditional pocket passer, I'm cool with that, right? Like we've seen quarterbacks win like that. I do think that there is always a narrative, and I think the interesting thing is a lot of time teams will move on at quarterback maybe after year 2, 3. That's young, that hasn't kind of Tua has answered a lot of and righted a lot of the wrong. So I do think you'll see that like for 3 years in a row, Tua has addressed what has been the narrative on the offseason and found a way to conquer it. And I do. For me personally, I want him to play less robotic and play more like that killer he was at Alabama, where he was, that assassin who could put the ball wherever he wanted. It didn't matter how big the stage was. Tua always had that quality to him. And I want to see that. I think Mike McDaniel and Tua have a great working relationship, but I also think that sometimes they hinder each other. And
we're going to talk about that. That's the next subject we're going to get into.
I think Tua needs to get out of his head in those games. So, I think a lot of the things that we see, the struggles with Tua, are actually failed mental reps as much as a physical.
Well, I think with what Coach AJ says, how do you improve in winning big games? M. Cord basically nailed it. Experience. That's the only way. This was the first year where he had played a full season. Now, there's someone in the chat right now. They said that he hasn't won any big games in 4 years. That's a bold-faced lie.
Right.
The Chargers game was a big game this year. I remember there was over 1,200 people in the chat after we beat them. I remember the expectations for Herbert and the Chargers heading into the season. Let's not let hindsight make us history revisionists. And Dallas was a big game. Who are we lying to? Dallas was win and you're in. Win and you clinch your playoff spot, you're in. He's won big games this year alone. He doesn't win them consistently enough. That's the issue. He's 2-6 this year. That's a 25% win percentage in those games. That's not good enough.
I think to me, man, it's even more than that. He has trouble beating the quarterbacks that have superpowers. I think that, you just said 4 of their 7 losses were to the Bills and Chiefs. Man, and I said this last week. I know Mahomes is the best player in football right now. Josh Allen to me is number 2. Josh Allen's I know he's a Bill, and I hate to say it as much as anyone, but he's so damn good. It's hard, but I don't think it's fair. Look, man, every quarterback in this league has shown 90% of the quarterbacks in the league have shown a capacity to win big games. Tua has won big games. They're not at the clip that we want to see. He's got to do it.
That's the problem. He's not doing
bigger.
It consistently enough.
And the other problem also is the people that are defining big games aren't all speaking the same language. We all have different goalposts that we're moving to say what a big game is.
Well, look at this guy in the chat. Chargers are a non-playoff team because he didn't use what God gave him. He didn't use his ears and listen to me. The first game of the season, the Chargers were viewed. That was a big game. Dude, the Chargers had a top 8 pass defense heading into this season, right? They were top 8 last year. They had a healthy Khalil Mack and Bosa back, Derwin James, and
Mike Williams and Keenan Allen at that time.
Yeah, but hold on. Derwin James and what's his face was back. The dude that went back, J.C. Jackson was back and healthy. Remember, we're the reason he got his shit packed and sent to New England because Tua torched them. So that team, the expectations were that team was going to be. Remember, they were a playoff team last year.
I had them as a playoff team. I did.
Exactly. Remember, they were a playoff team last year. Everyone expected them to take the next step, and everyone expected Herbert to enter the MVP conversation. Like I said, people can use hindsight to be history revisionist, but we had over 1,200 people in the chat after that win. So I know how big it was viewed by this fan base and outside this fan base.
Right. It was a big win. It was the opening game on the road on the season without Jalen Ramsey. I thought there was a chance we could lose that game, to be honest. And it was a big play. And I think Tua, what he showed in that game was he showed that fearlessness that I'm talking about, right? That throw to Tyreek, that touchdown in that end zone. There's probably not 2 other quarterbacks in the league that can make that type of throw, actually. So I think that's a good barometer of, and
he doesn't do it enough, man. There's no denying it.
Well,
he just doesn't win enough.
Loses, and that's important.
Yeah, but it's the big. Agreed. You got a 65% career win percentage. The problem is, I just brought it up this year. You're 25%. in 8 games against, good teams. That's not good enough.
100%. Agree with
right?
you. 100%. Absolutely.
And I think that's what I keep telling people. That's what frustrates us the most about Tua. We've all seen him do it. We know he's capable of it. Why aren't you doing it more? What's holding you back? What's stopping? Right?
You know what's funny though, and I just thought of this, is this is why you usually see, when you see a coach change, you see a quarterback change, because one thing that's hurt Tua's development, right? And he's a 25-year-old guy, so it is development. And we saw Josh Allen develop later in his, at a later age, and having those 2 years under Brian Flores, if we had the last 2 years we had under Tua, right, and he had 2 more years on his contract, this conversation doesn't even happen. You know what I mean? Like, having a coach that didn't stand by him for 2 years.
I know.
Well, that's why it puts Tua at such a disadvantage.
When you mentioned the Texans earlier, I say this all the time. What makes me shake my head about CJ's in our system being built from the ground up. If Tua was in our system from day one being built from the ground up, do you know where he'd be right now, developmental-wise?
If Mike McDaniel is with Tua for 4 years right now, we're happy with the 218.
Yeah, we're not even having this conversation.
Right,
He's getting a $200 million contract.
And that's where I think that it's important for the Dolphins to get this deal done with him because of that. Like, let's all take our emotions out of losing a playoff game, right? And think about any type of business that you run. You don't get rid of great employees and great impact players at your work because they have a bad day or a couple bad days. Like, this is a journey. And I already told you, I'm not going to sell false hope. I'm not going to write big checks with my mouth for the Miami Dolphins until they can prove it to me. But to think that Tua isn't a franchise quarterback off of that, and I'm as disappointed with Tua as anyone over the last 3 games he played this season.
Yeah, wasn't good enough, man.
But that doesn't mean you move on, because and I'm glad I'm not on it, but I know that I guarantee that right now people are on Twitter trying to talk about how we could trade to the number 1 pick to get Caleb Williams, not realizing that that's a freaking pipe dream. There's 0 chance that's going to happen. You know what I mean? If you want a quarterback in this draft, you're getting Bo Nix. That's the quarterback that you're getting to replace Tua Tagovailoa in this year's draft. That's it. And in free agency, it's Kirk Cousins with a bad Achilles. And I hate to break this.
We saw what the Achilles did to Marino in the end of his career, right?
Well, this is breaking news. If a quarterback is available via trade 9 out of 10 times, something's wrong there, and it's not going to be an upgrade, because teams don't trade franchise quarterbacks. I listened to one of your shows a couple of days ago, Reason, and you said if Tua was on the market, teams would trade for him. Yeah. Of course they would. There's going to be. I
said 22 teams would trade for him because he's a top 10 quarterback. I said 22 teams would trade for him. That's what
there's 7 teams in the top 15 picks of this year's draft that need a quarterback. And while I love Caleb Williams and Drake May, and I'm intrigued by Jaden Daniels' upside at LSU, and I'm not a JJ McCarthy guy. I'll just be honest. I like him as a second-round prospect, not as a first-round. I think that Drake May and Caleb Williams are the only sure things in this draft at the quarterback position. Period. That's where the conversation ends for me. So, I don't understand how and who and where and what you're going to find at the quarterback position to replace Tua Tagovailoa. It's not good enough right now, but it's the best there is that we have. And I think there's opportunity for him to get better. So that's where, for me, it's a no-brainer, actually. I couldn't tell you one reason why it doesn't make sense except his performance in the playoffs. But, man, that's one game. We need you can't judge off of that sample size. In insurance, there's something called the law of large numbers. And that's how they assign, your premiums and your rate off of risk. They take it off a huge pool. And that's how they know, what premiums to give you on your car insurance. You can't operate off of a one-game sample size and draw a conclusion, no matter who the player in position is. You just can't do it. It's not fair.
We got some donations here. Knight says Henry would be a magnificent, but can we afford it? We'll talk about Derrick Henry in a little bit. Neil, will you be making a draft board like you did last year? And we'll be doing the mock drafts on the show. We'll be getting draft deep.
I will say this little thing. I'm working on a draft Patreon myself. So, yep.
To Self-Lord Nonsense, smash that like button and join the Patreon. Appreciate it. I just had a big Patreon update. I got to talk to you when we go backstage about it, though. I talked about Tua's extension. I talked about some of the Waddle stuff. I talked about Connor Williams because I'm hearing he's going to be the toughest to extend out of the three of them. I talk about Frank Smith and his head coaching chances. I talk about McDaniel and what's really behind the play calling stuff. And I talk about get some info about Ross and Harbaugh. It was a jam-packed Patreon. And it's also channel members. Go check the community tab. I got a written tab for you. I got a written portion for you guys too. Knight says we are 2 years behind, exactly to Neal's point, 100%, which is the bigger issue though. Mike's play calling or Tua's execution in big games. I think both. At different times. I've said this before. I'll let Neal give you your answer, but I think one time you're going to have bad situational play calling from Mike McDaniel. Then we've seen Mike McDaniel calls the right play and either Tua doesn't execute or one of the receivers or the offensive line doesn't execute. And by one of the receivers, yes, sometimes that is Tyreek Hill, right? We've seen good play calls, but a lack of execution from the quarterback, a wide receiver, or a tight end, or a offensive lineman that blows it up. And it goes back to what McDaniel said a couple of years ago to us. I can call the most perfect play you've ever heard, but if I don't get the execution, you guys aren't going to talk about it being a perfect play, right? So what do you think? Because I think it's both at times, really.
I think it's both, but I think it's the head coach's opportunity to keep his young quarterback out of the line of fire. And if you ask me today, and I love Joe Burrow, he's hurt. I'm not including him. The best three quarterbacks in the league right now are Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen, right? I think we can all agree. Look what they have. They have veteran head coaches that aren't afraid to run the ball and don't put their quarterback consistently in bad positions. Harbaugh, Andy Reid, and Sean McDermott. They're all better coaches, in my opinion, than Mike McDaniel at this point.
Yeah. They're way more experienced.
Yeah, they're three of the top 5 or 6 coaches in football.
Andy Reid might go. I think Andy Reid's a better coach than Bill Belichick, but that's just my opinion.
Well, you look and you think about that, right? Like the top 3 teams in the AFC right now have the best quarterback and 3 of the best head coaches. There's no mystery to why, but I think a lot of these young quarterbacks, because Lamar's still young, Josh Allen's still young, they've been helped because their coaches keep them out of the line of fire a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. Like, I don't remember Josh Allen having this national arrow pointed at him like Tua does. But, like, that doesn't do a lot of favors either. But when the national media is attacking your team and your players, you hope that your local media isn't. And a lot of times I think Tua's had a very unique situation compared to any of these players in this league. I really do think that. But I think Mike McDaniel does have a consistency to put Tua in bad situations. Like that 3rd and 2 and 4th and 2 against Kansas City, leaving your quarterback to hang and dry like that, man, that is, to me, that was as embarrassing a play calling as I've ever seen.
I'll give you a perfect example. Look at Mahomes and look at Allen the week before. Notice everything they were taking, those hooks and those stabs over the middle, 6 or 7 yards over the middle. Notice they were taking that, but there was nothing, that's what they're drawing up. Okay, take the empty stuff underneath, blah, 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 blah. We're forcing Tua to throw to deep digs over the middle of the field, and we're running hook routes right underneath it, drawing a defender to the area. So Tua in 29-mile-per-hour Gus has to freaking layer it over his own player and a defender to Jalen Waddle, and it ends up getting picked off. Now, it looked like it might have been tipped a little bit, but tipped or not, why are you making layered throws and setting your quarterback up for layered throws in 29? The whole job of a coach or offensive coordinator, as much as people don't want to hear about it, and it don't matter what Neal just alluded to it with what Reid does with Mahomes, what McDermott does with what Brady does with Allen. Your whole job is to make it as easy as possible on your quarterback.
100%.
Like that's your whole job. Play design, everything, play call, and play calling is an art, and he just doesn't have the art down. Franklin Sun says 4 out of 5 QBs we lost were to mobile quarterbacks. Hurts, Mahomes, Allen, and Jackson. D couldn't hold them or slow them down. They control the clock or put us in deficits, and we just couldn't adjust or control. Now, I think we did. I think our D played good enough to beat Allen and Allen the second time around, and Mahomes both times around, and I think the offense let us down both times against Mahomes.
Well, and one thing that I have to say about that is, like, Mahomes has mobility, but Mahomes as gifted as a passer in the league, so he's a pass-first quarterback for me. Allen and Lamar are, I already just said, they're 2 of the 3 best quarterbacks in football, but before we anoint them of having everything figured out, both those quarterbacks have a lot of questions to answer tomorrow, right? Like, and Sunday. Like, Lamar Jackson, like the conversation around him, which I don't hear in the national media.
Mm-hmm.
His performance in the postseason is just as big of a question to me as Tua's performance in big games, and I put that in air quote. Like this tomorrow is a huge game for Lamar Jackson, the Baltimore Ravens, where we're supposed to get 6 to 8 inches of snow here in the next few hours in the cold, where, it's a huge day for Lamar. And look, Josh Allen's done a lot of winning and a lot of good performances in the postseason, but he has not won a Super Bowl. And
he hasn't beat Mahomes in the playoffs.
He hasn't beat Mahomes in the playoffs. Like that to me, like the only quarterback in this league right now that has no question to answer is Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah,
that's it. That's the list.
Yeah, because I mean, you're out there. I know we're talking about Tua's extension, but just give people a brief reminder. And like, there was a big portion of the Ravens fan base that didn't want to pay Lamar last year, right? Now he's having an MVP season, right? They wanted Tyler Huntley to start, right?
Right. And I'll say this, it's even bigger than that. Lamar Jackson said goodbye to Baltimore and wrote an article or a letter, and it was published in the Baltimore Sun, which is one of the biggest magazines here, publications here. Where the Dolphins are right now reminds me of where the Ravens were 2 years ago. A quarterback that had a lot of questions, and I think that's fair to say about Tua, and it's fair to say about Lamar. Lamar had that MVP year, and then he had a couple years that were injury-plagued. People questioned whether he loved the game, all that stuff, right? 22 players, the Ravens ended that season 2 years ago on the IR. The Dolphins, we know their injury. Like where the Dolphins are in their development reminds me a lot of the Ravens 2 years ago. And if we get those type of results in the regular season, I think we'll all be very happy that that's where the jump is to see. But look, the fan base was torn. Now everybody's got Lamar Jackson jerseys saying Lamar is the best player in football.
Yeah.
Winning changes everything that you think about your team, your favorite players. If Tua beat the Chiefs and had 550 yards passing and 5 touchdowns, but then went to Baltimore and got steamrolled, we'd have this same conversation we're having right now.
Yeah. So let's get into this. I got an interesting thing I want to pose to you, Neal. Could drastic changes potentially be coming to the playbook? And this is why I want to get into this, okay? Now, he's already talked about potentially, taking play calling out of his hands, and I've heard that's a real thing. Like, that is not just coach talk. I heard it's actually being looked at. That's being talked about. But I want to read this to you, Neal. Okay. So there's an interesting part of one of Barry Jackson's latest articles, and I'll read it here to you, and then I'll go into something, and then I'll get your thoughts, okay?
Yep.
So it was his 10 Dolphins decisions developments that were gnawing at him. That was the whole article. So the first point really stuck out with me, and it had me thinking, so I want to lay this at your feet and the listeners' feet. So he says, why was communication an issue late in the season after practicing for 6 months together? After Sunday's 26-7 loss in Kansas City, it was disconcerting to hear Tua Tagovailoa repeatedly cite communication shortcomings and leaving the impression that some of these problems could have been avoided if addressed more thoroughly by players in practice. He said, and I quote, "It really started with practices. That's how we should have got things going, was in practice with the communication, knowing where we should be going in this loud environment. Those miscues lead to delay of games. We can't change the protection because we don't have enough time." Things like that. It was communication errors, right? And side note, people always ask, why doesn't Tua audible? Why doesn't Tua? And I say, it's check alerts. Exactly. He's about to explain that right here. Check this out. So then he was asked about late season problems on third downs, and Tagovailoa again cited communication issues. Miami was 1 for 12 on third down in the playoff game. He then cited communication problems again when asked why the Chief blitzes were effective against them, which they're normally really good against the blitz, right? And he said, and I quote, "I would attest that to communication errors that we've had. Am I hearing the right formation? Okay, we're getting out, but we have 2 motions that we have to use. Then there's maybe 9 seconds left on the clock, and we're motioning. Now it's about 5 seconds, and we don't have time to change. So now we've got to play, and we've got to throw where our hots would be, but they pressured. Spags had a good game plan. They executed well against us." I mean, Liam Eichenberg, he's responsible for identifying the middle linebacker and calling out IDs and shifts and stuff. And he said that, everything was, he was loud enough is what he said. When Eichenberg said he was loud enough, and I'm listening to this, I think too is quietly talking about Mike McDaniel. That's what I think he's talking about, how late the play call is getting in. Then he's got to read the defense. Then while you're doing your motions, and if Tua doesn't see something he doesn't like, by the time the play call gets in, by the time they get up to the line and run the motions, he just said there's no time on the clock. And I want to hit you with this, Neil. Check this out. Seth Walder, you know who he is of ESPN, right?
That's good.
Okay, he just dropped the motion reports. All right. So the Dolphins had motion at the snap 68.2% of the time. Number 2 team, LA Rams at 44.1%.
Wow.
No, check this. You want to get better here? The Miami Dolphins had motion on 82.8% of their snaps. Second highest was the San Francisco 49ers at 75.4%. Neil, is there too much window dressing for how quickly one or thing needs to change drastically to this playbook, Neil? Either McDaniel needs to have that play in with 20 seconds left on the clock, or they need to figure out having these 2 or 3 motions, because sometimes, Neil, it looks like we hired Matt Canada instead of Mike McDaniel with all the motion we're running. What do you think about this? Because when you hear Tua talk about that, Tua is saying, I got to play through it. I got no time.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of validity to this. And first of all, I've always prefer offensive play calling coming from the booth versus the sideline.
Agreed.
You have a better view of the field. You can see it. And if you're the head coach of the football team, you're on the sidelines, you're dealing with a lot. You're dealing with a lot more than just play calling, right? And I'll be the one to say that if it's not said is Mike McDaniel enters this season coming up, 2024 season, as firmly on the hot seat with this roster and no playoff wins, meaning this Dolphin team does what it does again this year. Mike McDaniel, I would be very surprised if he got a 4th year here in Miami. So what you nailed it, man. There's too much complexity. The play calling coming in late, then it's the motion. So what you do is that you put the defense on the offense, meaning the defense knows the play clock. They know that the Dolphins
They
aren't
dictate.
they're not going to get that snap off until there's 3, 2, 1, or 0 seconds. Almost 99% of the time, that's how much the Dolphins drain the play clock. Then if you're a pass rusher, you can time your blitzes very, very syncly. And I think that's what happens. And for me, one of the things I've been banging on the table for months is they need to find a way to become – I like some of the complexity of the offense, but I like it in much smaller doses. They need to find a way to become more conventional on offense. Sometimes simplicity is the best form of sophistication.
Did you notice we were under center a lot more against KC? Did you notice that? I don't know if you noticed that.
And I don't know if that was, you know, what I attribute it to is maybe because the winds were so loud that they couldn't even communicate well in it.
Yeah.
And that's one thing. And I don't want to make excuses, but those conditions, I hope that we never play in again. Like that. Like I heard, I read something on, I think it was Pro Football Talk, that players might have got frostbite or something.
Yeah. Fans got over, what was it? I think it was over 15 fans between frostbite and hypothermia contacted the fire department, and then a few players complained of frostbite too.
Yeah, I mean that's insane, man. I hope we never
safe.
play it again.
It's safe, Neil.
But
safe.
McDaniel, man, and I love Mike, and I know you do, and I want him as our coach next year, unless we could get Harbaugh. And I'll be 100% honest, I would take Harbaugh over him in a second, and I would probably take Mike Vrabel over him in a second too, if I'm being honest. But he's here. I like Mike. He's a young guy. He's only going to get better than a coach. He got better from year 1 to year 2. I hope he swallows that ego and understands he doesn't have to be the cool guy walking on the sidelines being everyone's friend. They used to have something here, and the reason Brian Billick got fired after they won a Super Bowl was that a lot of the Ravens front office thought the Ravens were so good on defense they should have won again. I think we can all agree, right? The Ravens defense, 2000s, top 3 defense of all time, if not the best.
Yeah. Them in the Bucks.
Yeah, so they all talked about why Brian Billick got fired. And one of the things that you'll always hear, they call it Camp Cream Puff, where the Ravens just ran a really soft camp and all the veterans ran it. The inmates ran the asylum. And I think there's a part of that happening in Miami.
That's what I've said. Yo, Neal, you bring that up, and I've said with the Penguins, I always go back to the Penguins after Bilesma when we won, and I felt like it happened. It's happening with Sullivan. You know, I've told you this. You get that clubhouse vibe, like it's a golf club, like it's everyone's there. You know what I mean? Just going through the motions, and we're all buddy. Hey, let me tickle your tit. All this kind of stuff. Everyone's buddies. It's a clubhouse atmosphere instead of being a business atmosphere. You know what I mean?
Well, and look, man, I'll be honest. I think the Dolphins fans took the loss harder than a lot of the Dolphins players. You know, I don't want the highest paid player on my team the next day saying that his internet went down and he couldn't play video games. We're talking about Ashley Lips and stuff. I like, for me, man, like that was hard stuff for me to see, because I'll tell you, man, like I don't know about you. Like you said, it took you a few days to recover. Like, I mean, dude, that was like a gut blow, man. That's like getting news that, you know, for me, like someone died. Like I just, for me, and we just talked about this on before we got on here. We have to demand, as a coach and staff, as the Dolphins coaches, we think they're very talented and they're good coaches. They have to demand this standard. Mike McDaniel claimed that there's a standard in one of his interviews. He's got to hold his team accountable for that, right? And I saw Al say they have hard practice, and I've heard that too. I just think there's a field there where the Dolphins players kind of have more power than the coach, and I could be totally wrong. That's just how I perceive it from what I see. Mike McDaniel, you know, I think him giving up the play call duty, if he was really willing to do it, but I wouldn't want him to not be a part of that game plan and session to say, if it's Darrell Bevel, like, Darrell, here's the things that I like, you know, like, let's make sure we're running these. But like to give some of that, because I do think playing against the play clock a little too much has hurt this team. And like we saw the procedural penalties in key spots, man. And there's nothing more frustrating as a fan, a player. And then, you know, when you're getting those, man, and you're on the defense side of the ball and you see that, and they, you know, they're punting, it just breaks that continuity of the team. Like, you got to get down on those procedural penalties. So
let's get into this. People want to hear about it. Let's look into the Dolphins' grim salary cap outlook for this season. Omar was on the show yesterday, and Omar said we got to clear about $65 million just to franchise tag Omar. Just a franchise tag. Omar was even thrown back. Just a franchise tag Wilkins. Got to clear that much money. That's a lot of money. On top of that, you know, the rumblings now about Waddle, you know, we got, I believe, what does Tyreek go up to this year? Tyreek goes up to what, 34 million this year?
Yeah, his real bad year is next year, where he gets 56? Up to 56 billion. Yeah, that's and it's a $45 million savings to release him, which won't happen. But
I think, what do you do about Holland? What if Holland Holland's going into his final year, right? Like, if he wants to get out ahead of it. Like, here's the thing. Do you really, if I listed you Robert Hunt, Connor Williams, and Christian Wilkins, do you think it's a real possibility two of those three guys don't return?
I think all three don't return, if you ask me right now. And here's why. I think the damage is done on the Wilkins thing, and I think Wilkins is going to get a big contract. I personally have heard the Vikings and Bears are.
But wouldn't you transition tag him?
So the transition tag, so what? So that you
get a pick, or you get a pick, right?
Of course, I would do that. Yeah, because I would love to get the pick. I think when it's all said, I mean, the Bears have a ton of cap space. The Vikings, we know the ties with Flores. I think somebody's going to get Wilkins out. And I did see the clip that you showed me with Big O saying that, you know, he heard a little birdie, blah, blah, blah. I think there's validity when, you know, your running mate gets paid and, you know, you think you're a player that you're not. And Wilkins had a great season. He actually made a big believer out of me this year. I hate to lose the player, but where we are, I don't want to say we're in salary cap hell, but we're at a salary cap crossroads for sure right now. Robert Hunt, like I know it was one of those websites. I think it was Over the Cap that said his projected cap this year is 8.5. I've heard people say that's going to be more like 14 to 15 million.
I've heard 12. I've heard 12.
Yeah, so like and then Connor, it's hard to pay Connor coming off that injury, man. And we've already got enough injuries with Chubb and Phillips. Like, do you really want to bank on three players coming off significant injuries to bounce back? So I think a complete rebuild of the interior offensive line is going to be needed. But the beauty of this is, and you said Omar said we did clear 66 million. We're 49.3 million under the cap right now because we just signed 8 players to reserve contracts, right? Brandon Peely, Ethan Bonner. I don't have the list in front of me. We're at 45 players on the roster right now with a $49 million deficit. So the way I've always looked at it is there's three buckets where you can create cap space, right? There's releases, there's restructures, and there's new contracts. And I'm going to start with the new contract because we talked about it so much. They're going to extend Tua, and it's going to save $10 to $15 million. And if you just operate and say it's going to cost you $10 million in the low end, right?
Yeah.
That cap hit that you're over is 39.3. Then you can go to 2 simple restructures. Jalen Ramsey and Bradley Chubb for me. Jalen Ramsey frees you 18.2 million. Bradley Chubb frees you 14. That's 32.2. So now we're $7 million over the cap. Well, then there's your releases. And I'm just going to do these names. I've already done the math, and I got it jotted down here. Emmanuel Ogbah, Jerome Baker, and I put that in quotes because there could be a restructure option there depending on what happens in the linebacker market. I have Mike White, and I know some people will be like, why would you cut Mike White? I'll talk about that in a second. Jeff Wilson, Keon Carlson, and I'm cutting Duke Riley, man. I'm sorry. Like, I am cutting him. Those moves itself saves you 35.3. So now we're $28 million under the cap. Now, here's another thing I'm going to throw in. It cost you about $9 to $11 million to sign your draft class. Well, you don't have to worry about taking out of that $28 million because I'm releasing Xavier Howard as a post-June cut, and that saves 18.5. And then I have enough money to pay my draft class and shop for some veterans and ingredients needed during the season. So, like, the way I look at it is the Dolphins are going to have about $28 million in free agency. Now, they can restructure Terron Armstead, Zach Sealer, Tyreek if they wanted to. I would definitely not touch Tyreek's contract if I'm them. There's other ways they could create money, but I see them having $28 million in cap space with a list of free agents that looks like this, with Christian Wilkins, Connor Williams, Robert Hunt. So when you ask me, I think Andrew Van Ginkel has a potential to kick because of Phillips and Chubb being injured. I think they could look to try to get a deal done with Van Ginkel. I also have heard that they like from Dallas, the Dallas Cowboys, Dorrance Armstrong, who's a pass rusher, who's an unrestricted free agent there. And another name I'll throw out that I've heard the Dolphins like is Harrison Bryant, the tight end from Cleveland, who played at Florida A&U, I think it was. I think they're going to try to get Braxton Berrios back on a cheap deal. Why not? He's a good punt returner. He's going to
girlfriend's down here. His family's starting to get established down here. He's
only going to cost you $2 million a year. I'd be interested to see if they can't keep Wilkins, what kind of deal they could maybe keep Raekwon Davis on. I don't think he's going to get big money, but because they're $28 million under the cap, I think that they're going to look to definitely figure out something on the interior lineman. Because I think this is how I think the Dolphins view it, and I don't agree. I think they view that they have their starting tackles, and I think they have a starter. They think they have a starter in Liam Eichenberg, and we can argue, but I think they view it as having 3 starters, right? If I had to do a mock draft,
Wynn could come back cheap too.
Yeah, if I had to do a mock draft today, and I did one yesterday, I have the Dolphins getting Troy Fontenot, who's a guy who played left tackle at Washington, who I think is going to play a left guard there. Yeah. So you can go out there and economically find a starting right guard, probably for $5 to $7 million. And I think the Dolphins are going to do that. I think the Dolphins are going to find savvy signing. So I cut Mike White in that philosophy. Well, Neal, who's going to be your backup quarterback to Tua? Well, you named this guy earlier in the show, and this guy, his market average value is about $4 million per season. The quarterback that I would like to get in here is Tyler Huntley, actually, from Baltimore. He's an unrestricted free agent. I love his mobility. I think that's a possibility. Now, I will also say, I think the Dolphins are going to be on the wide receiver market. I think that they had Cedric Wilson. They traded for Chase Claypool. They thought they had their guy in Berrios, and you would probably agree with me on this on Berrios. I
expected more, man.
Yeah, I was a disappointment. I thought he was going
especially on special teams.
So I think the Dolphins could be, and he hasn't got paid yet. Isn't Jerry Jeudy on the last year of his rookie deal? Like, is there potential to maybe bring a guy in like Jerry Jeudy? We like the splash signing. I think the Dolphins are going to look a lot different. Now, I know in the chat people are probably flipping out about Christian Wilkins. Look, guys, you have Waddle, Phillips, Holland, all due contracts. And me personally, I'll take all 3 of those players if you don't have injuries in the equation over Christian Wilkins. You do. I think you could keep, despite losing Wilkins, I don't think you could keep Holland, Phillips, and Waddle. I think there's going to be an odd man out, and I don't know who it is. Personally, and I love the player, Jalen Phillips, how he rebounds from his injury is going to be huge. But look, it's already, we're 2 months away from the start of NFL free agency. So in the next 60 days, the Dolphins are going to have to make a lot of these moves to get under the cap. I'm not happy with having to cut Xavier Howard in the scenario I just wrote out, but Father Time's winning that battle. His interceptions are way down. His injuries are way up. I love Xavier Howard. I think he's a Ring of Honor guy. I don't love how he approaches the game sometimes and what he says on the mic. I don't like that. I think he's gone. I think it makes too much sense. I think the hardest thing the Dolphins are going to do this offseason is lose Christian Wilkins, because I think they love him, and I think he's a great football player. He's a guy we developed. He's still young. He's younger. He's a good football player. Him and Zach Sealer play off each other really, really well. The unfortunate thing is he wants a lot. He wants $24 million, and I just said we had 28. Like, you won't be able to build the rest of this roster if you keep Christian Wilkins, unless you got him a deal on a short-term deal, and then you plan on jumping off of a Jalen Ramsey, or you do plan on moving off of Tyreek after the season. But we'll know a lot more about what the Dolphins' future plans are. The thing I've learned is I'm not hitching my wagon to any player at this point, Reason, because there's not a move the Miami Dolphins can make right now that would completely surprise me. Not anything. And I'm not saying they're going to do it, but even if they traded Tyreek Hill, I'd be pissed because I love Tyreek Hill as the football player, but it wouldn't shock me. You know what I mean? It wouldn't shock me because they attempted to build a superstar roster and they didn't get the results they want. And now there's a lot of money that has to be figured out. It could be a pivot. And I don't know what it is. And I don't think it's going to be off the quarterback position. I just think that it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. And the one caveat for me that I said in all that was Jerome Baker. Man, I don't know. That one episode of Hard Knocks might have made him a freaking fan favorite at Hard. Yeah, really, and because you see that, before we got on here, we were talking about players with the dog mentality. One of the biggest takeaways I had of watching Hard Knocks this year was that I underappreciated Jerome Baker's commitment to the Miami Dolphins. And, I didn't love the contract that he got, but damn, man, that guy, playing through that pain to see how gutted he was when he went down. I mean, you can save $6 million by restructuring him. He's a good football player. It alleviates a big hole. Now I say that, and Reason, the guy that I love in this draft is Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M, who I would love to pair with David Long. So it's going to be, I don't know. What do you think? You think there's going to be?
Well, first of all, I did my first 2 mocks because I was like, let's see what we can get.
Right.
2 picks in the first round. So my first one on PFN, I got Troy Fautanu, and then I got Jatavion Sanders. And then in my second one, I got Troy Fautanu, and somehow in PFF, Jeremiah Trotter dropped to me at 53. So I was like, all right, Troy Fautanu and Jeremiah Trotter are the first 2 picks. That's a home run. So I got a bunch of stuff to say on this. First of all, before we do, let's just Knight says, why does your fullback have 12 snaps and 29-mile-per-hour winds, especially when you re-signed him, Knight?
Yeah, it's big money. It's a big money.
That's happy. Is there any free agents coming out to get a line with depth? Knight says Jordan Morgan and Mims. Morgan left tackle. Mims is more of a right tackle, so I don't know if we're going to go after a right tackle. Morgan is intriguing. He's okay. Reason, any chance we add more gap and power runs? And I think people are asking that because, everyone just doesn't run zone. We mix in gap, but I think people are wondering that because especially the last 2 weeks, teams are just daring us to run up the middle, and we just weren't. We were taking the outside edge. I think that's going to have to be added, and we'll talk about that in a second after we talk about the cap here. That's part of the next topic quickly here. But my whole thing on this salary cap situation is I think they're going to try and get a deal done with Hunt. I think Wilkins is going to, like you said, I think the damage is done. And I think Connor Williams is going to price himself out. And what you said rings true and is scary to me. I think they might think they have an option in Eichenberg, and I think they're psychotic if they think that's an option. I think that's a depth option. That's a guy you want starting 1-2 games a year. That's not a guy you want starting 17 games in a year. That's the first thing I'm going to say about Liam Eichenberg. Because You
And
saw
he's
those
up
last
for,
2
and
weeks.
he's up for a contract after the season again.
Well, he was being destroyed interiorly
Oh.
the last 2 weeks. He's getting pushed back, and so like I think this team, Greer kind of warned us, right? Greer said, usually every offseason there's a 30 to 40% turnover, and I think he was just prepping us for a 30 to 40% turnover. I think this is going to be a team with no Xavier Howard. I think, like you said, the only one that might be back is Jerome Baker, and that's if he restructures.
Right.
I think that defense is going to look different, but also I think it was going to look different anyways because Fangio hasn't had a chance to bring in his guys and start molding. Now, if he's going to be here for next season, that's a story. But even if Ronaldo Hill steps in and takes over, Sean Desai is brought over and take over, either one, those guys are going to put their thumbprint on that defense. So I think the turnover was inevitable, and I think that's what hurts a lot of these people is we knew this turnover was inevitable, and I was one of the people telling this. Are we going to have a roster this talented inside this window again? And the answer, as we sit here right now, is probably not. Now,
they
might
draft
be able
well. They have to
Yeah.
draft well.
Yeah, you got to supplement for the draft, and you got to hope you get breaks with free agents coming your way. That's basically what you got to hope. You got to hope for breaks. So, listen, I think this is going to be very interesting. You do the numbers, all right? You just crunch the numbers of how to get to 68 million. Do you really want how to clear up all those numbers so I can get to 28 million over the cap? Do you really want to dedicate 20 million of that as a franchise tag to Christian Wilkins? No. And I think you nailed it on the head. You bring back Raekwon Davis on the cheap, and you supplement further through the draft. The problem I keep scratching my head is, do people really think, because I've heard not a penny less from what Omar said, not a penny less than Quinnen Williams. Do they really think they're going to go to the table and put that contract relative to the production they just paid Zach Sealer for? I just don't see that. That's bad business. I just don't see them saying, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, right? But let's go ahead. Final point, and then we'll go into free agency.
I'll just say this real quick, though.
Yeah.
Man, that Zach Sealer contract looks great.
It's a steal.
Zach Sealer, and I said this, he's a better player than Christian Wilkins overall for me personally. I think he just makes more impactful plays. I don't want to – there was a guy who wants to be a Miami Dolphin employee so bad in the offseason who told me that I was an idiot and that Christian Wilkins would never be the type of guy to play hardball. These guys have agents that are playing the hardball for them. Their loyalty is to themselves, their family, and their bank account.
The bag,
not the Dolphins, man.
Yeah.
This is common sense. The guy, after everyone you just said, though, Reason, if I could keep anyone on this team that's a free agent, for me, it is Robert Hunt. I think Robert Hunt, because I think Austin Jackson without Robert Hunt is not that good, to be honest. And I was happy about the Austin Jackson contract, but man, he has not looked good the last 3 to 5 weeks. Since he got paid, he hasn't looked good. I think Austin Jackson benefits from Robert Hunt to him, and I would actually pay Robert Hunt $12 million if that's what he wants. I'm not letting $3.5 million a year, because then if you keep him, Reason, and you know that you have Robert Hunt and you have Austin Jackson and Teron Armstead, and let's just say you get Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon, the center, in the second round, like then you can deal with signing like an Isaiah Wynn for $3 million and have Eichenberg as backup, because you have 4 bona fide starters on your line, and maybe you could get maybe you get a Kendall Lamb or something for dirt cheap. But Robert Hunt is the guy, man. I like Wilkins the player, but Robert Hunt, to me, you got to bring him back.
Yeah.
You don't let him hit free agency. You got to get it done now.
All right, finally here, Derrick Henry. I'm going to play this clip. He was on Bussin' with the Boys. Is Derrick Henry trying to get recruited by the Miami Dolphins?
Where did you want to go, though?
Yeah, where did you want to go? Like, I'm just
in the draft.
I want to go to Atlanta.
I wanted to go. I wanted to go to Miami. I wanted to play for the Dolphins. That's where I wanted to go. That's where I thought I was going. And I thought possibly I was going to go to the Panthers. I thought it was a slim chance I might end up at the Cowboys, but I figured they would probably take Zeke when they did.
So, we knew the tie was last year. Now he's telling everyone that's the team he wanted to be drafted to. We had someone in the chat earlier talk about Derrick Henry. Personally, I could see them making the splash if he comes here on the cheap. I don't think he's getting the bag. But I think it's one of those things where after we saw what we saw from Mostert and Achane, I think they're pretty happy with their backfield. And if this is, and with all the money that they don't have, I think unless this is a team-friendly deal, Neil, I don't think there's a chance Derrick Henry comes here. But I do think they would bring him on if the money was right. Because they have an out to get off of Mostert this season, right? Mostert only had the first year in guaranteed money. Now there's no guaranteed money.
They save $3 million if they release him, and $3 million if they release Jeff Wilson. $6 million bucks.
Yeah, so there you go. So there's the majority of what they'd probably offer Derrick Henry right there, right?
Right.
What are your thoughts on this situation? Because clearly he's doing his PR rounds. We knew what the rumblings were with the Dolphins looking into the running back market last season, even with Mostert and Achane freshly drafted. They're going to find, if they move off Mostert and Jeff Wilson, they're going to look for a complementary back to pair. I don't, as much as we all like Chris Brooks, I don't know if they view Chris Brooks as that answer. What are your thoughts on this? Do you see them at least? I see them at least checking in. I don't know if I see them making a play based on the money, because I think you're going to have teams like the Baltimore Ravens potentially ponying up money in the offseason.
Yeah, the Ravens actually had given a trade to the Titans that they thought at the deadline the Titans were going to accept, and I think initially the Titans seemed like they were going to take it and then kind of pulled away from it. So here's my opinion. The Dolphins are absolute pretenders at running the football when it matters. And Raheem Mostert can score 99 touchdowns next year, but that doesn't make him good at running in clutch situations. And I love Devon Achane, but he's got to prove to me he can take the NFL beating. He might just be, and I mean this with all respect, when we talk about the wide receiver position, he might be just an ultimate gimmick play, meaning he'll get his touches in the backfield. You can line him up in the slot. Like, Achane could be your chess piece on offense. I like that better than a gimmick player. He could be a chess piece, and you want him to carry the ball. We need a guy when it's 3rd and 2 and it's minus 30 degrees in Kansas City that Tua can turn the ball and hand it off to and get those 2 yards. And I've never seen that from
And then Mike McDaniel's going to have confidence in to call the play on 3rd and 2 that he's going to say, I'm just going to get it. Let's go for it.
Yeah, I haven't seen that from Mostert. I haven't seen that from Jeff Wilson on a consistent basis. To me, you have to explore this contract for Derrick Henry. He's a running back with a lot of miles. We're not talking 15. We're probably talking 8 million. So the way I pose it is, would you be happy moving on for Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, paying another $2 million to get Derrick Henry and Devon Achane as your backfield? Tua's best friend
is the running game.
Is going to be the running game. Yep. And this running game, when we needed it,
our offense is so predicated. We play the running game is what opens up those tight windows a little more for us, right?
Yeah, and when we beat the Broncos and we put up 70, and it looked like we could run the ball, we didn't see that in the second half of the season.
Yeah, because that was the one game where we had our whole offensive line healthy.
Yeah, Raheem Mostert only ended up with 1,029 yards, despite having 931.
You want to hear something better?
Almost, right? Like,
did Raheem Mostert? Remember when it happened? I was pointing out not enough people were making a big enough deal of Isaiah Wynn going down. Remember I was saying with the run game, Raheem Mostert didn't have a 100-yard game after Isaiah Wynn went down.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying. Like, you can't let statistics and watching the All-22 and break it down tape are totally different things. Numbers lie, people don't, right? Like, you can sit there and I don't want to take away, because I've said this on the show all year and it's not good enough for some people.
No, it's people lie, numbers don't, is what you meant to say.
Yeah. Mostert's been great. He had a great season. He had he had his career year. He had 21 touchdowns. How the hell do you not give him a pat on the back on that? He was a top 3 offensive player on this roster this year. But in those last 3 games of the season, he wasn't. And he was hurt. Yeah. And he was a non-factor.
Omar said he shouldn't even have gone out. Omar said him and Waddle, from what he saw at practice, they shouldn't even have been out there against Kansas City.
And I believe that. And that's what I'm saying. We have a history.
That's why you saw Mostert disappear after that drive where he got us to 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 when he blew it, right? That's why you saw him disappear. He's too banged up.
Well, we have a history now of seeing it in back-to-back seasons with Raheem Mostert, that he's a really good football player here. But, man, if you burn him out early in the season, he ain't going to be there in those big games. And that's something the Dolphins have to take in consideration. This team has a lot of players that got hurt and they're freaks this year, but they've got a lot of players that also have been hurt a lot in their career.
We got to wrap this up because I got to go, but I wanted to add to this. people need to remember, Neal, wasn't one of the reasons me and you wanted Jonathan Taylor was to save the tread on Mostert and Jeff Wilson for the end of the season, because we were like, they're not going to make it by the end. If you get a Jonathan Taylor, you can bring those guys in the December months. All of a sudden there's tread on their tires and those guys can be good switch up pace backs. But anyways, final thoughts, Neal. You got about 50 seconds and then I got to get out of here.
Yeah, no, final tough loss, tough season overall, but man, you got to keep your eye on the prize and move forward. It's in the past that this team still has a lot of talent. I don't necessarily think change is a bad thing. So I think having some players leave this roster, I think the Dolphins roster will look a little bit different. And, I'm excited for the offseason. And I, like you said at the start this off, I'm really excited that the Dolphins have a first and second round pick this year. Those are the money rounds of the NFL draft. And for me, it's kind of reigniting my passion towards the NFL draft. So I'm excited. Fins up, man. And it was a long season. It didn't end the way we do, but, I don't think anyone – I'll tell you this, I'm not throwing my jerseys in a flame like I saw that somebody did.
Oh my God. In your, yeah, that was in the thread of you leaving. Someone throw that. But we had over 400 people today between X and YouTube combined. So I appreciate all of you for coming through early on this midday Friday matinee. Listen, if anything happens this weekend, I'll be live, but my intention is to let you guys enjoy the football this weekend. Then we're going to be back next week. The offseason starts. I'm going to hit up Neal and all the boys, see if we can run the postseason round table, wrap that all up. But we got a lot of stuff coming your way over the next couple weeks, and me and Neal will be keeping you locked in on the draft. Smash the like button. Subscribe if you are new. Appreciate all of you guys for coming through, and we will see you guys on the next one. Until then, until Margaritaville sends us a cease and desist, fins up all day, every day.